Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Valley of the Judged. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have my good brother here in the temple, the master of cursed knowledge and occasional Final Destination protagonist, good brother Monarch.
Just waiting for the next near-death experience to hit me.
They seem to do that near the end of the year.
Yeah. Give it another month and we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. So, we are back once again, delving into more of Augusta Universalis after our brief look into the core of the 2d6 system within it, which I remember you being iffy early on, and I think after last week things are starting to coalesce.
Yeah, early on I was definitely wondering about how they were going to handle that, but with how the dice did end up working out, the kind of limitations on how crazy that these things could pile up.
Mm-hmm. And
I wish some of that was a bit closer together, but yeah, the actual system itself, I did start to warm up to once it actually clarified a lot of things.
Yeah. So, with Bello, we are going to be getting... Now, I will note there is one section that we kind of skimmed, and that was Mysterium. Aside from the fact that it didn't fit the whole pairing setup I'm going with. The other reason I skimmed past it is it's a lot of fluff-related material, and very good fluff. I will make that clear. But it is not something I can really dissect in the same way. Now, obviously, it is opening up going into what the purpose of the combat system is. But the first part we have is, well, surprise. The characters, much like their enemies, may reach their target stealthily and perform their first attack in a fight by surprise. The target of such action has the right to perform a check with Sophia and a Pertia that will depend on the circumstances in which the attack by surprise takes place. Alternatively, if your target can see you, but he does not expect an attack, you can attack him suddenly by charging him. In this case, the attacker performs an attack check, and the attack party has the right to perform a defense check. In both cases, if the target fails the check, he is taken by surprise and suffers an attack as if he failed to dodge it. Moreover, the attacker can add one of the following effects. Add a powerful emblem in addition to the attack at no additional expenses, or a block emblem in addition to that of the attack with no additional expenses. During a fight, a creature may be taken by surprise according to the same rules. In the case of success, the attack occurs by interrupting the initiative order, which resumes as soon as the attack is completed. Once the target taken by surprise is hit, he loses such status and can defend itself according to the standard procedures. So, we don't have a surprise round, we have surprise basically as a attack option. A risky one, but an option nonetheless. And when it comes to the emblems thing, we will get to that later. But when a fight between two or more opponents begins, then you have the Tempest, or Tempi if we want to go plural. In which case, all PCs and NPCs get their AP, and the initiative order is calculated. Each character performs a check describing what they intend to do, and then the actual actions are performed according to the order of effective value. You have to describe your intended action rather than what you actually do. Descriptions such as "I hit him in his throat with my wrist blade" will not be correct, as this would be an action of the fight. Basically, you have to describe what you're attempting to do, not what you're doing. And that's important because you have to choose the be correct, Virtus and Pertia for your initiative check. You won't be performing that action immediately, though. Describing your intentions in order to perform initiative check is useful to put your PC's abilities in play. So essentially, your action, the action that you intend to do, also plays a factor into initiative, and we'll revisit that when we get to turns. The rest is just a example. But when it comes to distance, we have melee, short, and long, as well as extreme. Covering the distance is for short, long, or extreme is going to be using a certain amount of resources. Short distance, 1 movement, flight, or emblem. Long distance, 2 movement, flight, and or emblem in any way. Extreme distance, 3 movement, flight, and or emblem combined in any way. So we do have a bit of abstract distance, which for a game like this, that would make sense.
Oh yeah. Everything else is kind of abstracted to a degree. It'd be really weird if this was on a grid.
Which I know some people are going to have a very difficult time coping with that, because there seems to be this idea that if you're doing role-playing games, you have to do it on a grid, which you really don't. But at the start, all participants get a number of AP equal to their dexteritas at the same time. Then the first Tempest starts. Each performs actions according to the initiative order. You spend AP to perform your actions. You can have 1 turn during a Tempest, allowing you to perform all the actions you want to perform until you can pay the cost in AP. And at the beginning of the second, third, and so on rounds, you do not get AP together. You get them at the start of your turn during the Tempest. And turns are composed of 3 phases. Preparation. So this is where you get your starting dexterity-based AP. Action, where you act and or move, choosing which action you perform, so long as you've got enough AP to spend. And conclusion. You end your turn by either choice or lack of AP, thus switching to defense. If you still have action points, you keep them and add them to those you'll obtain in the prep phase of your next turn. Then it goes to the next character down the initiative order. And from what it sounds like, initiative order is determined by the basically the attribute and skill pair. There isn't a hard initiative stat. Now, I do appreciate
It's an interesting way to do it. I don't think I've seen one do it quite this way before.
There's been some games that have it where you have to describe your action and then the action resolves. But I think there's been a few that have it where whatever you're rolling is going to determine initiative. But this also means that people who have a much higher attribute and skill pair are gonna be going first. So oddly enough, this ends up avoiding the god stat problem. Uh, what you and I have talked about it, like how dexterity is a god stat because of all the stuff it impacts in a lot of D20 games.
I'm not quite on board with you with that, just because other stats, even though they don't affect as much, are a little more impactful. But again, it's going to depend game to game.
Oh,
But it's definitely a problem that comes up sometimes.
mm-hmm. It's well, not only that, but also in some instances, no matter how leveled you are, initiative barely changes.
Yeah.
It has been a point of critique. I mean, you could take improved initiative, which is what people throw at me whenever I bring that up, and I'm like, that's one feat that's only doing this one thing, and you have a very limited amount of opportunities to get feats. Doubly so if you're anyone but the fighter. I'm pretty sure improved initiative doesn't even count as as a bonus feat for them. It's one of those traps that Cook put in a lot of his work. But here you don't really have that problem. People who are going to be a bit further, for lack of a better term, leveled, are likely going to have higher pairings, so they're more likely to go first. And I know they called it an initiative check, but if the okay, at first I thought, okay, it's just using the stat and not doing the roll. I'm like, nope, you are still rolling initiative. You're just using an attribute skill pair instead of a dedicated initiative stat. Okay, and they do clarify later on, shortly after that 3 setup thing I mentioned with turns, you have a hard cap of 20 AP. Oh. When you're in a defense status, i.e. it's not your turn, there are some limited actions you can do. Oh. And you can it does talk about how if you've got enough action points you can attack and move at will, which implies to me we're not dealing with some opportunity attack kind of thing. Because if we're not dealing with a map, it wouldn't make sense to have that. But for attack, you perform a check. The attacked adversary also performs a check in order to save themselves. So attack and defense are rolled. It is a contested roll. The description of both depends on the Virtus and Pertia used in the check. If your effective value is higher as the attacker, not equal or lower, so it looks like we have ties going to the defender, then the attack is successful. Otherwise, it fails. After the attacker has performed the check, the attacked party can decide to perform a defense action, parry or dodge as an interrupt. We'll get to that in a bit. But you can't just let an attack hit you. You have to choose an action to defend yourself, whether it's a defense or an interrupt. If you choose not to, it's considered an automatic failure to dodge. But you don't get the automatic failure progression that we talked about in the past. which makes sense because it's not an intentional botch. But a successful attack inflicts damage equal to the effective value of the check, plus any bonuses from emblems. The attacker absorbs damage equal to the virtus used in the defense check. If he dodges or tries to interrupt the attack, it's a pretty standard setup. The damage you take is equal to the difference between the rolls. Some emblems might add to that difference. As a baseline, every character has 60 life points, so we can see some of the fighting game DNA that was in one of the other projects that was loosely associated with Destino Obscuro, that being Musha Shugyo. But you can use any Pertia to fight so long as you can coherently narrate it for the scene. So we're seeing a recurring thing where there isn't a dedicated pair of stats that says this is the attacking stat. That is a interesting thing to have here.
I mean, it makes sense. Everything else in this game is pretty heavily narrative focused and how it plays out. So this game is definitely sticking to one kind of idea for how everything works. So that's a good thing.
Yep.
Makes everything easy to kind of follow from one system to the next.
Yep. So if several opponents attack a character simultaneously, the latter will obviously find things more difficult. If you're defending yourself against your first attacker, you don't suffer any penalties, but you have a -1 malice to the EV of each check for every additional attacker after the first. So in this regard, fighting against multiple opponents is still going to be a risk. Then they do go regarding distance, which we already talked about. Then with life points, that is in the same setup. The health slots, which is basically how the life points are represented on the sheet, are arranged in 2 rows and divided into 6 slots of 10 each. But for each 10 damage that you take, there is a action penalty, -1, -2, and so on. Each -1 obtained by loss of LP causes the break of a Systema that has of the Technolorica at the player's choice. Armamenta and Agates are the first to break. If those are absent or already broken, one of the Instrumenta will break. Once a Systema is broken, it will not be available until it is fixed, and from that moment on, its Carta Systemis will be face down. Facing the card down may cause the loss of bonuses obtained with a particular Assectum if a figure formed by these cards becomes incomplete. So as you get your ass kicked, the benefits of your suit get lost.
And it's a nice, easy, and straightforward way to keep track of it.
Now, when they're talking about Carta Systemis and we did kind of talk about that last week, but Assectum, we didn't. It basically means that depending on how you arrange Systemis, you might give yourself bonuses. think of the Carta Systemis as a 3x3 grid that you're placing up to 9 cards on. Obviously, if you're at 0 life points, you faint. If you're at negative 20 life points, you're dead. I do like that they added War Never Changes. And you can be healed with a check. One that's related to the Minervae arts. You could also use Instrumenta for this purpose, but the check depends on how well you roll. If you roll a critical failure, they lose 2d8 life points that are not absorbable. On a failure, 1d8. On a partial, they're stable, but they don't gain or lose life points. On a success, they gain life points equal to the effective value. On a critical success, they gain life points equal to effective value, plus an additional 2d8. You can only perform a healing once per person per day. You can try and contrive on a partial result. In the case of a failure, you could try again in a different scene. And a Praetorian's body, because of the modifications, will heal 1 life point per hour of full rest. Now, if you want to fix a Systemata, that is also a check. On a critical failure, it's not fixable on the spot. It needs to be repaired when returning to base, if that's still possible. On a failure, it's broken for the scene. On a partial, it's reactivated, but it will break as soon as it's used again. On a success, it's fully repaired. On a critical success, it's repaired in half the time with half the resources required. But then we get to actions. And each kind of action does require a different AP cost. So activating of the Assectum, it's based on one's Technolorica. This allows the use of its flight systems, as well as choosing the best way to use internal reactors by distributing the Cartae Systemis of the Tabula Systemis, thus forming one of the figure of Assectum, which we'll get to later. The rest is basically you're activating your armor. So, Henshin Pose is optional. But one of the potential interruptions you could do is a counterattack, which costs 1 AP plus the cost of the action you're taking. You're essentially attacking in place of defense. If it fails, it's considered a failure to dodge, and you take damage. If it's a draw, both characters hit each other at the same time, inflicting damage on each other, respectively. But if your actions are interrupted by a counterattack, you don't lose AP that you spent. So that's a nice caveat there. For adjustment of the Assectum is another action, costs 1 AP, lets you change the location of 2 adjacent Cartae Systemis and moving 1 to an empty space. And of course, once per scene, you can state the figure of a Sectum without spending AP. You could you have Feints, which is 2 AP plus the cost of whatever action you're doing next. Which does mean that during it that you can declare the pair before they can do anything. It says you're first to describe the action, but last to throw the dice. Which I get what it's doing, but it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of bonuses to doing feint aside from playing the mental game. If you want to do an improvised use of the emblems, that's 2 AP per emblem. So that's your catch-all for things that don't fit the rest. Interference costs 1 AP plus the cost of the action performing. Much in the same way as counterattack. It's just more than just a attack. You could use interference if you wanted to try and get out of the way so you don't get hit. But if you want to fight barehanded, that's 1 AP. If you want to parry, does not cost AP. Thank God. I don't think that habit of dodge or parry that some games have, where you can only do that once per turn, would really be a good idea here. I really hope you didn't forget you were muted again, Mark.
Yeah, no. What I'm doing, I've reread Feint a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure what the whole point of Feint is.
It feels like a mind games thing, but I have a feeling Feint isn't going to get used as much unless there's equipment that benefits it.
Yeah, on its own, I'm not fond of how Feint works so far.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if something comes up, but as written,
Mm-hmm. But parry doesn't cost AP, which is very nice. And it is nice that even if you succeed at parry, you're taking at least 1 point of damage. So we do have chip damage in this. Let's see, recover can only be done during the first or the last phase of your turn. If you've been affected by emblems altering your ability to move and react, you can recover to regain your abilities in the first and last phase of the turn. So basically, recover is one way to spend AP to shake off certain debuffs when your turn comes along. You can also recover to retrieve objects or weapons if you're at melee distance from them. Dodge does cost AP, if only just 1. But on the other hand, I'd say dodge is a more all or nothing thing compared to parry. Because if you succeed, you don't take any damage. If you fail, you not only take damage, but you're taking damage equal to the virtues used in the defense check instead of the effective value and all the remaining damage. I.e., if you fail a dodge check, you're taking more damage than you would have otherwise. So, like I said, it is a risk. We also have Overload, which costs 1 AP per emblem, where you can add an additional emblem to an attack or defense option. And However, for each effect added in such a way, the Praetorian will be affected by one emblem of the Demiurge's choice, which will always be negative. That makes sense for an ability called Overload.
Yeah.
Let's see. Movement usually costs 1 AP per movement, except with certain Technolorica, especially ones that have the distance emblem. Oh. Let's see. When it comes to using Systema, the cost for that is varied depending on the Systema using. Flight is going to be based on the category of your Technolorica. On the other hand, if you are using flying, you're in flight status, and there are some emblems that are specifically built around being anti-air.
Now, before we head on to checks and fighting, something I want to note I'm liking about how this is done is, while parry is specifically the 0 AP option, you could also note parry is probably overall the worst defensive option here, in part because you're always going to be taking some kind of a hit. That said, I actually like that you do have that 0 AP option that'll make sure you can always defend yourself from something.
Mm-hmm.
But there is kind of a game you're playing of how much AP you want to keep on hand for your actual much better defensive options you have from all of these others. I don't think we've quite covered a system that does something like this between me and you.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like how that plays out using this AP system they have set up.
Yeah.
It's a really nice touch.
I'd say parry is lower risk. I wouldn't say it's the worst option. It's a lower risk option because it's not a all or nothing.
True, but you're always kind of taking something on it. I think overall dodge does read a bit nicer, especially since dodge does actually cost AP. Like if these were equivalent options, I wouldn't say it'd be a good thing one cost something and the other didn't.
Yep. Because remember, with dodge, you either dodge all of the damage or you fail it and you take even more damage than you would have otherwise.
Yeah.
But when it comes to checks in fighting, there are two types of checks in this game: checks with degrees of success and contrasting ones. Fight actions require contrasting checks, so contested rolls. Sometimes you might be in a situation where you're doing a check that isn't contrasting. And even those, despite them not being attack actions or the like, still have an action point cost. And that action point cost is going to range from 1 to 8. They give a few examples, but I think this is one of those things where providing a hard list of examples would kind of be redundant because it's a situational thing. So giving guidance on how much it should cost is a better move, which is what they do here. For example, opening a door can cost 1 to 8 AP depending on the situation. But then we have the Figure of Assectum. Once the Technolorica is activated, you can choose where to channel this energy and how to manage its functions by means of different Assecti. You have to put your Carte Systemis on your Tabula Systemis. You will place 5 of them in an active status, facing up, while placing the other ones in inactive, facing down. Active Systemata are the only ones that can be used in a fight. It is possible to activate and deactivate the Carte Systemis with the adjustment action. Depending on the position of the active Carte Systemis, you will obtain different bonuses in different aspects of your armor. So we have the Augment Assectum, which Looks like a T block from Tetris with an extra step. Uh, this gives full power to motion systems on the ground. The standard cost to perform movement actions is lowered by 1 AP. And then so for a light armor, movement costs 1 AP, but a single movement action lets you move 2 degrees of distance. For a Media, 1 AP instead of 2. For Gravis, 2 AP instead of 3. And once per scene, you can get 1 bonus die in a check involving rapidity and precision in movement on the ground. Then the Auxilium Assectum, which gives full power to the support systems. The cost for using all your Instrumenta is lowered by 1, a minimum 2 for each use. Or you obtain 1 bonus die in a check when using Instrumenta. This can be activated with either the left or right side configuration. When not fighting, once per scene and until this figure is active, you can get a +1 bonus die in a check involving an Instrumentum. Then the Avis Assectum, which gives full power to the flight systems. This is much like the movement one we saw with Augment, just for flight. And when you do still get the bonus die. The Furor Assectum is giving full power to weapons. Any armament has its cost lowered by 1 to a minimum of 2 AP, and you get a +1 bonus die to a check when you're using Armamenta. When not fighting, once per scene and until this figure is active, you get +1 bonus die in a check involving impulsive or aggressive actions. Then we have the Invictum Assestum, which is giving full power to shields and defense systems. The cost to use Aegis or Aegides type systems is lowered by 1, minimum of 2 AP, or you obtain +1 bonus die in a check when you use your Aegides. And outside of combat, get +1 bonus die on a check involving defense actions or physical resistance. If you aren't using any of the figures above, then you're in the Repens Assectum. This is not an Assectum, but rather a hasty way to place your carte when reacting to an unexpected attack, or performing the adjustment action. This gives power to the activation systems of the Technolorica, and the cost to activate it is thus lowered by 1 AP. When not fighting, this has no effects. Then we have Subsidum, which gives full power to the non-warlike reactions. You can perform interferences, but not counterattacks, without paying the standard +1 AP. But any action that is directly offensive always moreover, any action that is not directly offensive, diplomacy, picking locks, investigating, or analyzing, always costs 1 AP less than what is decided by the Demiurge to a minimum of 1. You're not getting a whole lot. I know they said that there's options for 0 AP actions, but there's not that many of them. The main one we saw is parry.
Yeah. I think that's actually probably for the best to not have too many 0 actions.
Yep. And then we have the Ultor Assectum, which gives full power to systems managing warlike reactions. You can perform counterattacks, but not interferences, without paying the standard +1 AP. So it is interesting that we have essentially a 3x3 setup of your equipment, and you have to decide what you're actually focusing on. Because no matter what, unless you're using Repens, you only have 5 of these active. And because you're adjusting the Assectum with the action of the same name, the 5 that you have active is the max you can have active. You can't activate all of them at once. It
I
is a
do like this because it kind of showcases, I almost think, more of the style of how your character fights over the equipment.
Mhm.
Just because you can set like that cross pattern no matter what set of equipment you actually have. So this feels like it more represents your character's own unique style and how they're making use of that equipment
Mhm.
rather than the equipment itself, which is a nice little touch for both flavor and mechanics.
It also means that you can't switch between the asectums all that easily. At least in combat. You could obviously do that outside of combat easily. It also means that just having your equipment slots set up in in um in a way like how you might set up equipment in Diablo isn't really going to help you as much as you might think. But of course, then we get to Systemata itself, and there's a few bullet points we have. First is how much AP it costs to use it, its effect, the valor, the level of personalization of the Systema with respect to its regular counterparts, and ammo, which varies from 1 to 4 and determines the chances of a Systema to get overloaded, overheated, or jammed. We'll get to that in a minute. Oh. You can use the Systema when the Technolorica is deactivated. You just pay twice the AP cost. Now, then they go into distance, which we've already talked about. Oh. Generally, an armamentum only hits at melee distance. In order to hit at range, you need to add a distance emblem. This will usually be in the effect part of the Systema. And you don't need to write each emblem individually. You can just write what you have here, where you have the distance emblem and then times 3. And for each emblem, it's adding the effect. It's adding to the range by 1. So it goes from melee, short, long, extreme. So putting 4 distance emblem on a Systemata would kind of be pointless. But because of the setup, whether or not a Systemata is one-handed or two-handed is pointless. But it is interesting that melee armamenta can be activated by defending. Both can be activated by attacking. So we don't have defensive firing. As amusing as that might be. But when it comes to defense, only active agatas and melee armamenta can be used actively for defense, quote unquote. Shields, blades for parrying, and energy barriers. If you want to use it, you got to pay up. If you are equipped with a shield and you don't have enough action points to activate it while parrying or dodging, the emblems of that shield are not considered as a defense. If it's a passive one, it doesn't cost AP, so their emblems always work. So that it is nice that you have to decide whether or not you're going to do active or passive defense with your choice of Systemata. And I know somebody would look at this and go, well, I'll just put a bunch of defensive Systemata in and I'll be really hard to hit. I don't think that's exactly going to save you here. But then we have ammo. For each check performed in order to use a distance armamentum, the number is generated by the 2d6 thrown or chosen if it includes bonus or danger dice are equal to or lower than the ammo level, the following effect occurs. Only 1d8 generated a result equal to or lower than the ammo level. The armamentum works, but it gets overloaded or overheated or jammed immediately after. In order to use it again, you have to perform the use systema action with no other effect other than restoring its normal functioning. If both 2d8 did a result equal to or lower than the ammo level, the armamentum does not work, and then it gets overloaded or overheated or jammed. In order to use it again, you have to do the same use systema action. So we do have ammo, but this is more like chance of jamming than how many shots you have with that systema, which I'm perfectly fine with, because if we were to do ammo in a more traditional approach, that'd be doubling down on cost. You're already paying up by AP. So, like, having AP and an ammo clip would be a bit silly, I think.
Yeah, again, it's the more narrative focus, especially. It makes more sense to do it this way, I feel.
Mm-hmm. But
this game doesn't seem to want to keep track of all that little tiny stuff.
It's very clear that this is a game that wants to lean far more towards action movie combat.
Yeah.
And the fact that they suggested using 2 steps from hell for your soundscape kind of tells you everything there. But then it goes into emblems, which this is going to be the biggest part of the mechanics for Systemata and for combat as a whole. This kind of concept was also in Augusta Universalis. And you're not required.
I think you meant to say a different name there.
Yeah, Musha Shugyo. It's been a long week. But you do have to narrate how the emblem is being used. And some emblems will have scenic effects, some will have more direct effects. Some will cause altered statuses, so that's your buffs and debuffs. Altered statuses last for the whole fight. They're cancelled with a short rest or through healing. Though remember, you can do a kind of refresh to get rid of altered statuses. You're just paying up an AP. There are some emblems that are passive and some that are cumulative. Cumulative ones are just you're adding that emblem multiple times and getting a better effect. So, but even with the amount of emblems that there are, they are in 5 major categories: alterations, damage, protection, space-time, and advantages.
I'm not gonna lie, space-time seems like a weird one compared to those others.
Weird when you consider the whole the whole armor integrated that allows you to call upon it at any time.
I mean more just list like alteration, damage, protection, space-time, advantages. That's like you have the whole freaking, I forget what the actual joke was, but you got like the goblin party of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Bob. It's like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Space time.
Yep. So with alterations, we have continuous damage, which does exactly what it sounds like. And I should note each one has a narrative tip, i.e., what sort of weapons or effects might fit that kind of emblem. Continuous damage can be put up to 10 times and can be removed with a remove emblem. Let's see, then weakness, which has it that when you use dexteritas, impetus, or resiliente in a check, you add 1 danger die. And because of the way the cumulative works, actually, I thought it was going to be a case where you'd put more danger die if you have more weakness emblems, but no, it just means that it costs more. Versus continuous damage, where each continuous damage implies 1d. I know I said 1d8 divided by 2, but I would say it should be 1d4, but this game only wants to use the 2d8, so okay. But for each, you're essentially doing 1 to 4 damage for each continuous damage emblem.
And also, there comes the 3d8 that's possible over 2.
Yes, so I can see why they did it this way instead of having you roll d4s. There's going to be a different bell curve rolling, say, 10d8 versus divided by 2 versus 10d4. And I don't feel like breaking out any dice for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we have sensory deprivation. Which, in that case, you have, when you're trying to attack or defend or use Sophia in a check, you have to apply 1 additional danger die for each emblem. Let's see, disarm is not cumulative. It's exactly what it sounds like. Endowment. An action with endowment applies only to the emblems of its action and does neither inflict nor absorbs damage. It generates a temporary fortuna consisting of its name and an emblem of choice lasting once per scene. So it's a temporary buff. And for each additional endowment emblem, you can grant the use of a fortuna for 1 more time or an additional fortuna, i.e. +1 extra uses of the already owned one or an additional 1 for each emblem. Let's see, numbness. Every time you use Auctoritas, Ingenium, or Sophia, add 1 danger die. Non-lethal. If it would. This is basically the whole. You're not killing them, but you are reducing them to 1 life point. The whole knocked unconscious kind of thing. See, then paralyze and refracting are 2 more. Then we get to the damaged ones, where we have Culminator, where you can, if the action fails, roll 2d8 and add the result. The new result replaces the previous outcome. So you have a do-over and option. Conclude. The action inflicts 1d8 of extra damage as long as it is the last attack of your turn.
I'll say by and large, we might actually be able to just kind of skip over most of these because they basically are doing what they say on the tin.
Yeah.
And just at a glance, a lot of these, they're not stuff you wouldn't expect to be here in a effectively build your own weapon type of setup.
Yep. And we have relative damage, multi, which is essentially a multi-target kind of setup. Pierce, which it is exactly what you think it would do. uh, Powerful just adds more damage, which is why it has cumulative infinite times. That doesn't mean you can put powerful infinity amount of times, because remember, adding emblems is a cost. But let's see, crumble is oh, that's a nasty effect. Let's see, smash is exactly what you think it is. Oh. Basically they can't use any Resilienta or passive absorption in when parrying. Extreme effort lets you you essentially sacrifice life points at the end of each action. But on the other hand, you get to decrease the cost of another emblem of the same action by 1 AP. A minimum of 1 if it's an action, and 2 if it's a systema. Utmost is a fun one. If you hit, you do 3d8 more you do 3d8 extra to the effective value before assigning damage. If you fail, you lose your turn and give it over to the opponent. It feels like
3d8's quite a bit in this game, so yeah, I see why.
Yeah. So if it hits, you're gonna hit hard. If it doesn't hit, you're gonna be hit back. Then for protection, we have undo, which lets you remove emblems that are used in an attack against you. Absorb adds one more one extra damage absorption for each powerful emblem associated with it. So you need to have absorb and powerful in order to use it. Heal works in a similar way. It just heals life points. Reflect is basically if the attack party successfully defends himself, the attacker does not hit the target, and all emblems of the attack are reflected against him. So, like you said, exactly what it says on the tin. Remove lets you eliminate an altered status, whether it's positive or negative, at the choice of that person performing the action.
So I did have time to just quickly look over space-time.
Yep.
It's movement and positioning.
Pretty much.
I do not get that impression when I hear space-time, but that is technically an accurate depiction of space-time abilities.
Push away is a push. Dash is a movement. You can do this just before an attack. Fall down is exactly what you think it is. If they want to recover from a fall down, they have to spend 1 AP to do so. Or they can only perform defensive actions and not get any counterattacks. They also take extra damage for each degree of distance covered with this fall. Let's see. Slump. When it's activated, if at the end of the action the character is lying on the ground or is unable to move and must recover. I look at this as the attack that knocks you down, like trying to fire the noisy cricket or something. And the narrative tip they give is high recoil weapon. Which The noisy cricket definitely is that. Distance we've covered a bunch of times already. Neural. The result of the die is lower than your ingenium. You can replace it with your ingenium level. Applies only to one of the d8s. In case your ingenium level is higher than 8, the result of a die can never be higher than 8. When using Neural, any critical failure in a check will be considered a failure, and in the same way, any critical success will become a success. If you obtain a Phos or Nephos throw, the obtained ones still apply. Though this basically lets you kind of cheat with a substitute for the die roll, but you cannot get the best or worst results. So even if you critted while you have with a neural emblem, the highest you get is just a regular success, not a critical success. I think that's a nice trade-off for being able to swap one of the die with a set number, and potentially doing so at to automatically give yourself an 8. Oh. This does mean somebody who's got a high enough ingenium could use this to give themselves a Phos throw. On the other hand, you'd need to still roll an 8. So it's not. This sounds like it could be a breaking kind of advantage, but in practice, I don't think it is. All this is just locking one of the d8s. But let's see, launch is, well, if you've played any fighting game or any character action game, you know how this goes. Oh, same thing with drag. Oh, I do find it interesting that drag has a cap of twice, because it does hit at a distance. So because of that, the highest it can go is long. Oh. Then with advantages, there's +2, which is a conditional effect. +2 support. Same thing. Reliable. In a case of a Nephos throw, eliminate one Nephos die for each reliable emblem. And Blitz, which you can only perform that. You can only use this as the first attack of your turn. Kind of an opposite version of Finisher. With Blitz, if the result of any dice is lower than your Dexteritas, replace it with your Dexteritas level. This applies only to one of the d8s, unless you have 2 uses of Blitz on the action. And that same kind of thing we saw with Neural, where you can't do the best or worst results, still applies with this. Let's see. Block. The next attack must be different, and it automatically hits. Which, all right. Let's see, disruptive. When you get a first or second degree, it's basically the the opposite end of reliable. It just means you get a do-over on a second or degree Phos throw instead of a Nephos. But unstable, you have a higher risk of a Nephos throw. depending on how many emblems are on it. So if you have 2 unstable emblems, you could get a Nephos throw on a 3 or lower, on 3s or lowers. Let's see. Then invert reverses the effects of an altered status that does not interact with damage or healing in the action. Not valid with continuous damage. When using invert, also choose a second emblem with altered status and invert its effect, giving the target an inverted altered status. You can add additional emblems to invert by spending 1 additional AP for a maximum of 3. Basically takes all the inverted basically takes debuffs and turns them into buffs. Oh. Let's see, then aim, which you can have up to twice. It's basically the opposite end of unstable, where it is giving you a higher FOS range. Let's see, heavy. You have to, if you have it for each, when you're using it, you have to roll a danger dice. On the other hand, adding heavy doesn't cost AP. Then returning basically lets you, it is exactly what it sounds like. And stun. The opponent cannot interfere, counterattack, or interrupt the turns of the other creatures until its next turn. As long as one is stunned, movement actions cannot be performed. Then Vampirize does exactly what you think it does. After that, they go into interactions among different emblems.
I don't think we'll need to go through each individual one, but this is a nice list to have just in case you're wondering how different things might interact.
Yeah.
Just a nice list of clarification rules is what this is.
Mm-hmm. So hold on a sec. My PDF reader wants to be difficult. So it is pausing on a dinosaur with a gun. As one does. But what do you think of the... We kind of covered how combat works, but what do you think of the emblem system we've got here?
So I mentioned before, this is basically your build a weapon type setup. It's probably not a perfect way to describe it, but it's close enough. I like it. You got a lot of options.
Mm-hmm.
Can't really see any part of this immediately that stands out to me as like, how does this even work? Simple, plenty of options as I just said. I like it.
Yep.
It's not a really complex system by any means, but doesn't need to be. It does exactly what it wants to do quite well.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say it fits pretty naturally with the Assectum spread that we saw earlier. But the Demiurge section, a lot of this is basically the GM section, but there are a few things to note. One is that it's reinforcing that the players describe the action. The Demiurge or the GM determines what pair you're going to be using for the check. But they also talk about a traditions and secrets setup, which can be a way to add characterization. The 5 Ds: descriptions before rules, dialogues, decisions to make, delicate decisions, direct the story. I find that first one, descriptions before rules, of it a lot more useful than the rulings not rules thing that you hear from OSR types, because it's pretty straightforward as to what it means.
That said, just at a glance, this is basically just the guide for the DM for how to resolve everything. We've largely talked about a lot of this already, but it's good to have a nice little section here to just hit the points one by one.
Yep. And then we go into the idea of creating a missio. This is, as we've hinted at early on, Augusta Universalis is a very mission-focused game. And I do like that that for designing missions, we do have this very nice sheet that you can kind of use for developing the narrative arc, and it is hyperlinked to a Google Drive that has the full thing. Well, at least it did. Unfortunately, you need to request access to that. So
the one thing in this book that has a hyperlink.
But of course, I also like the pyramid of stakes that we have here. And answering what if you want a simpler story, or do you have to tell all 4 points of the paradigm? And then giving a example of missio structures.
Yeah, you'll notice we're skimming all of this stuff because this is largely, again, it's behind the scene Dungeon Master stuff.
Yeah.
It's not something we typically go much into.
It is very good to have here.
Oh, yeah. And it is very well laid out here. Like, I've been critical of a lot of the structuring of this book overall so far. This section, I do not have any of those complaints about. This is very well laid out and easy to follow.
But that more or less covers the Bello and Demiurge sections. We spent more time on Bello than we did on Demiurge, admittedly.
Yeah.
Let me adjust that a little bit so that we have a better image of the spread. But all that said, what do you think of the combat system and the way systemata work in combat?
Overall, I've got no problem with this. Like, we've covered systems similar to where you just have the kind of abstracted distance set up. The emblems give you some ways to play around that, or play with that with distance, and using like anti-flight stuff, I think works well with this game for flight. So it's not just like, I'm flying, well, what does that mean? Without things like that, I don't think it'd matter much with this kind of abstracted system, so I like that stuff like that's in here. It's very well put together and thought out. Like, I have no real issues with any of this other than I still don't really get faint.
Yeah. Like, I think we see what Feint is trying to do. It's just we don't see what the mechanical advantage to doing it is, as opposed to not doing it.
I was thinking we might have seen some like emblems or maybe something with the... I forget the name for how you assemble your systemata stuff.
A
and
sectum.
The bonuses those give. A sectum, that was it. I was hoping to maybe see something in a sectum that do something with Feint. I'd almost say make some emblems that apply specifically to Feint abilities. If you do that, I think Feint could be a great and fun ability. But there's nothing in here that really lets you make use of it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the one hit I'd give this system so far. It's not a big one because it's one ability that's just getting shoved to the side. But it does annoy me.
Mhm. But
Yeah.
that's really it, and I don't think that's enough to be a deal breaker, especially with the approach that this game is doing.
Yeah, because you can just ignore feint and everything else still works perfectly fine.
Mhm.
So yeah, I like it.
Yeah. And when it when it comes to, I know we didn't cover individual systemata, but that's because we kind of already did.
Yeah.
In the back of the book, there's a bunch of sample systematas, and there's also the fact that at the end of the day, a systemata is an AP cost, which that can be calculated, and the more emblems, aside from certain ones that are added, the more expensive it is to use.
Yeah.
And again, because of the more action movie design of the game, it's not very hard to customize systemata. In fact, because of the way things like Valor worked, it's clear that there's going to be a few sessions in, you're going to have a different vibe from characters who are just using stock systemata to ones who have kitted it out. That is the vibe that I'm getting from that. And when we get back onto this next week, we will be tackling the grand finale, which is mostly going to be the advanced procedures, which is going to revisit Valor points, as well as a bit of the bestiary. The annihilation mission that's at the back end, we're not covering that because we don't cover that kind of thing. But I think we'll have a good understanding of where we stand on Augusta Universalis by next week.
Yeah, next week is just kind of gonna fill in the last few of the gaps that are still there.
I'd almost call it a formality, but that's not exactly the case.
Yeah, it's important enough to talk about.
But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.